There is a woman. You may not see her name trending. You may not see her post selfies with a man by her side. You may not see her rushing down the aisle or changing her last name. But if you listen closely, you will hear the sound of a soul becoming whole. She is the woman who lives alone, and she is not to be pitied. She is not broken, not bitter, not abandoned. She is awakening. And if you stay with me until the end of this message, you will discover a truth the world doesn't talk about. The power behind the woman who chose herself. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a sacred silence that surrounds the woman who walks alone, not because she was left behind, not because she failed to be chosen, but because she dared to step forward when the world expected her to wait. The journey of a woman who lives without a man is not one of abandonment. It is one of deep alignment. To the untrained eye, it might look like absence, like loneliness, even like lack. But to those who understand the inner terrain of the spirit, it is clear. This woman has entered the realm of sacred solitude. When a woman chooses to live alone, people often rush to assumptions. They imagine her evenings drenched in sadness, her mornings echoing in emptiness. But the truth is far more nuanced. Living alone is not the absence of love. It is the cultivation of something richer, inner peace. It is not a deficit, but a devotion. It is not punishment, but profound purpose. There's an ancient parable from the East about a young woman who, after being betrayed and cast out by her lover, climbed a mountain to live in a small cottage by herself. For years, villagers whispered about her. She must be bitter, they said. She must be broken. But one day, a storm came and the river in the valley overflowed. The only light in the entire region came from the woman's home at the top of the mountain. She descended, lantern in hand, and guided many to safety. Only then did they realize the years she spent alone were not wasted. They were years of becoming. You see, what the world often misunderstands is that solitude is not the same as isolation. Isolation happens when someone is pushed out. Solitude is chosen. And when it is chosen with intention, solitude becomes a sacred temple where a woman can meet herself fully. In the stillness of her own space, she begins to hear things she never could in the noise of relationships that drained her. She hears her own thoughts uncluttered, her dreams unedited, her spirit unshackled. There is a kind of clarity that only silence can give. It's in those early mornings, when the only sound is the breath of her own body, that she realizes she's not alone. She is in divine company. She is surrounded by the wisdom of every woman who has ever dared to walk without leaning. She is part of a lineage of spiritual warriors, silent poets, and mothers of nations who learned to live with strength, not noise. Consider the story of Maya, a software engineer in her mid-30s, who decided after a difficult divorce not to rush into another relationship. She had spent most of her adult life adjusting, compromising, and trying to be less, to be loved more. When she finally moved into her own apartment, she didn't know how to sleep without a voice next to her. But soon, the voice she began to hear was her own, whispering ideas for her first book, inviting her back to yoga, reminding her of the woman she once wanted to become. Within 2 years, she not only wrote that book but launched a mentorship program for young girls in tech. Her solitude gave birth to impact. This is the mystery of the woman who lives alone. She becomes the source. No longer depending on someone to complete her, she discovers she was already whole. It doesn't mean she doesn't want love. It means she no longer seeks it from a place of lack. Her love is not a hunger, it is a harvest. She gives from overflow, not emptiness. But let's not pretend the road is always easy. There are nights that challenge her. There are holidays where the silence feels a little heavier. But instead of numbing or running, she sits with that discomfort. She breathes into it. And every time she survives another lonely evening without compromising her worth, she grows. Every time she walks through pain and doesn't rush to fill the void with noise, she becomes stronger. This strength is not visible to all, but it is unshakable. There is a Japanese practice called misoji, a ritual of purification that involves standing under an icy waterfall in the dead of winter. It is not meant to destroy, but to cleanse. Living alone, for many women, becomes a kind of misoji. Stripped of distractions, she learns to face herself, and instead of drowning, she rises. As we transition into the deeper truth behind her choice, understand this: a woman who chooses herself is not reacting. She is responding to the call of her highest self. The world might interpret her solitude as sadness, but she knows better. She has seen the cost of staying in places where her soul had to shrink. She has tasted the bitterness of pretending, and now she craves authenticity. She is not bitter. She is discerning. She is not closed. She is guarded with wisdom. Her choice to live alone is not a closing of the door. It is an opening of her spirit. She is becoming whole. When a woman truly begins to choose herself, it is rarely because everything went smoothly. No, it is usually after heartbreak, after betrayal, after silence from those who should have spoken up, after abandonment from those who promised to stay. But instead of remaining in bitterness, she rises in bravery. She chooses to stop bleeding for those who never learned how to hold her gently. There is a profound moment in a woman's life when she finally realizes, I don't need to be chosen by them, because I was already chosen by something higher. That is when the transformation begins. The approval she once begged for becomes irrelevant. The validation she once needed becomes an echo of the past. She has met her own eyes in the mirror and said, I choose you. And that is where her power lies. Let's look at another example. A woman named Said, a nurse who had spent most of her adult life caring for others, came to a point where she realized she had no space left for herself. Her energy was fragmented, given to parents, patients, friends, and a man who didn't see her light. One day she sat in her car after a long shift and whispered, what about me? That whisper turned into a decision. She found a small studio apartment and moved out. Her friends called it dramatic. Her mother was disappointed, but for the first time, she slept in peace. Her weekends were not filled with obligations but with reflection. Within months, her health improved. Her joy returned. She began painting again, something she hadn't done in over a decade. That one question, what about me, set her free. When a woman chooses herself, it shakes the foundation of everything that once held her back. She no longer makes decisions based on fear. She doesn't stay just to avoid being alone. She stops performing, stops over-explaining, stops negotiating her non-negotiables. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. She begins to become. This becoming is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like sitting in the sun with a book. Sometimes it's saying no without guilt. Sometimes it's walking away from an almost relationship and whispering, I deserve more. It is not showy, but it is sacred, and it ripples. Because every woman who sees her, who watches her live freely and unapologetically, begins to wonder, what if I did the same? What if I stopped asking others to tell me who I am and started discovering it for myself? Choosing oneself is not selfish. It is sacred responsibility. When a woman reclaims her power, she gives other women permission to do the same. This is how healing spreads, not through sermons, but through example. There is a quote by Carl Jung that says, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The woman who lives alone is living in that privilege. Not because she has all the answers, but because she is no longer afraid to ask the right questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I love when there's no one to impress? What makes my soul sing? These questions are dangerous to a culture that profits from her insecurity. Because a woman who knows herself cannot be manipulated. She cannot be sold false dreams. She is no longer afraid of silence because she has met God there. She is no longer desperate for love because she is love. And so she walks. Sometimes slowly, sometimes boldly, but always forward. She knows that every step away from who she used to be is a step toward who she's becoming. The journey is not linear. There are days she doubts. Days she feels the ache of wanting someone to hold her. But even then, she doesn't return to what broke her. Because she knows the cost of betrayal is too high. The price of peace is worth it. This is not rebellion. It is resurrection. It is the rising of a woman who decided her life would no longer be an apology. Her solitude is not a pause. It is a preparation. She is building a foundation so strong that when love finally does arrive, it won't feel like rescue. It will feel like recognition. So if you see her walking alone, don't offer her pity. Offer her respect. For she is not a woman waiting. She is a woman becoming. And that becoming is a fire the world cannot extinguish. There comes a time in a woman's life when she no longer asks for permission to live fully. Not because she has stopped needing love, but because she has discovered a love so deep within herself that external approval becomes secondary. This is not pride, it is peace. It is the quiet liberation that blooms in the woman who understands that independence is not simply the absence of others, but the presence of her own strength. The third truth about women who live alone without a man is this: they often evolve into fiercely independent individuals who master the art of self-sufficiency, not because they had to, but because they chose to awaken parts of themselves that were once dormant under the weight of dependency. Self-sufficiency is not about doing everything alone. It is about knowing that if needed, you can. It's about walking into a room and not shrinking. It's about fixing a flat tire without panic, building a life without begging, and making decisions without doubt. For many women, this kind of independence is forged in the fire of necessity. They begin by managing the basics, paying their own bills, making their own meals, organizing their time. But soon, these tasks become rituals of empowerment. Every act of self-care becomes a statement: I am capable, I am grounded, I am whole. In Eastern philosophy, the lotus is revered not because it grows in clean water, but because it rises through mud and blossoms in clarity. The independent woman is a lotus. She is not untouched by life's challenges. She has seen hard days, sleepless nights, and moments of fear. But she rises, again and again, not because she is invincible, but because she is deeply rooted. Let's consider the story of Claire, a woman in her early 40s who had spent most of her adult life in long-term relationships. When her last partner left suddenly, she was devastated. She didn't know how to function on her own. But instead of collapsing, she started learning. She taught herself how to manage finances, how to fix a leaking pipe, how to file taxes. Every small victory added to her sense of dignity. Within 3 years, she not only purchased her own home, but started a podcast sharing tips with other women who were learning to live independently. She didn't just survive, she soared. This journey into independence is not marked by arrogance, but by assurance. It's a quiet confidence that does not demand attention. You see it in the way she walks into a cafe alone and orders her coffee without hesitation. You hear it in the way she answers the phone, direct, grounded, present. She doesn't need to prove her worth, she embodies it. True independence is spiritual. It's the shedding of the belief that someone else must complete her. It's the realization that partnership should be a choice, not a rescue. It is written in the ancient Taoist texts: when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. The woman who lives alone lets go of expectations placed on her by culture, family, and fear. She becomes what she might be: unstoppable. There's something sacred about watching a woman come into her own. She no longer molds herself to fit someone else's image. She no longer sacrifices her peace for company. Instead, she nurtures her dreams, waters her purpose, and cultivates her talents. Her independence allows her to be both soft and strong. She doesn't wait for a man to buy her flowers. She plants a garden. She doesn't wait to be invited. She builds her own table. And slowly others begin to notice, not out of curiosity but admiration. This evolution into independence is not cold. It is courageous. It is the courage to sleep alone without fear. The courage to travel solo and marvel at the world. The courage to say no without explanation and yes without hesitation. It is not about never needing anyone. It is about never needing someone to be who you already are. Yet we must acknowledge that such independence often comes with its own battles. Society still tries to guilt the woman who lives alone. Don't you want a family? They ask. Aren't you afraid of being alone forever? But she does not answer to fear. She listens to the rhythm of her own soul, which whispers, "This is your time." She understands that loneliness is not cured by proximity, it is healed by authenticity, and that sometimes being alone is the only way to find out who she truly is. Which brings us to the fourth truth, perhaps the most misunderstood and the most powerful. Women who live alone often develop profound emotional intelligence. Without the distraction of constant noise, they begin to listen, really listen, to themselves. They become students of their own emotional landscape. They understand their triggers, heal their traumas, and cultivate compassion. Not just for others, but for themselves. Emotional intelligence begins with self-awareness. A woman living alone begins to notice the nuances of her inner world. She doesn't just know that she feels sad. She understands why. She tracks the patterns. She sits with discomfort long enough to decode its message. And in doing so, she becomes fluent in the language of her own heart. This self-awareness gives birth to self-regulation. Instead of reacting impulsively, she pauses. She reflects. She breathes. There's a deep wisdom in this pause. It says, I have nothing to prove. I choose peace over performance. It is in this quiet control that she becomes powerful. Not because she suppresses her emotions, but because she understands them. The emotionally intelligent woman knows that anger is often a mask for pain. That anxiety is a cousin to fear. That sadness, when allowed to speak, can become a teacher. She doesn't run from her feelings, she honors them. She creates space in her life to process, to journal, to meditate, to heal. And this makes her magnetic. Not in a flashy way, but in a grounded one. People are drawn to her, not because she chases validation, but because she radiates presence. Take the example of Aina, a visual artist in her late 20s who chose to live alone after years of living with roommates and romantic partners. The first few months were rough. She felt every ache of her past echoing in the quiet. But instead of numbing it with distractions, she leaned into it. She began painting her emotions: grief, hope, longing, joy. Her work gained attention not for its technical perfection, but for its emotional truth. She wasn't just painting pictures, she was painting healing. And it all began with the choice to be with herself. This emotional depth is what allows these women to build healthier relationships. Not just romantic ones, but friendships, family ties, and work dynamics. Because when you understand your own emotions, you become more attuned to others. You recognize the unsaid. You hold space for others without losing yourself. You respond with clarity instead of confusion. It's not that women who live alone are void of emotion. They often feel deeply, but they have learned not to be ruled by emotion. They dance with it, listen to it, let it guide, but never dominate their choices. This balance between emotion and awareness is rare. It's a kind of spiritual alchemy, turning pain into purpose, turning confusion into clarity. In ancient Zen teachings, there is a phrase, when the mind is still, the truth speaks. Women who live alone create stillness, not as an escape, but as a path to truth. They meet themselves in silence and emerge with insight. They trust their intuition, because it has guided them through storms. They don't need a crowd to affirm them, because they have learned to affirm themselves. And this emotional intelligence, combined with independence, becomes a kind of superpower. It allows them to lead with grace, to speak with authority, to nurture without losing their boundaries, to love without losing their identity. They become women who can walk into chaos and bring calm, who can sit with someone else's pain without trying to fix it, who can forgive without forgetting who they are. These women are not saints, they are seekers. And what they seek is truth, not just in the world, but within themselves. This inner clarity affects everything. It shapes how they parent, how they partner, how they serve. It affects how they pray, how they plan, how they persevere. The woman who lives alone and truly listens to her inner voice becomes unshakable, not because life stops being hard, but because she stops being shaken by what no longer defines her. This journey is not for the faint of heart. It takes courage to be alone with your own thoughts, to face the mirror without filters. But in that raw honesty, transformation is inevitable. She becomes a woman who no longer fears being misunderstood because she finally understands herself. And once she touches that level of depth, there is no going back. Shallow conversations no longer interest her. Surface-level relationships no longer satisfy her. She is drawn to what is real, what is rooted, what is radiant. She knows that her solitude has been her sanctuary, that her independence has been her initiation, that her emotional awareness is not a weakness, but a way of seeing the world others miss. And so she continues, not just living but illuminating, not just growing but glowing. And the path she walks, though solitary, is lined with the quiet applause of every woman who has dared to do the same. There is something powerful, almost sacred, about the moment a woman looks at the story of her life, sees the threads that have bound generations before her, and chooses to rewrite the script. Not out of rebellion, but out of realization. A realization that not all traditions are truths, that not all inherited behaviors are worth preserving, and that some chains, even when made of love, are still chains. The woman who lives alone without a man often becomes the one who breaks generational patterns and redefines what womanhood means. Not just for herself, but for those who will come after her. She begins not by attacking the past, but by examining it, with clarity, with courage, with compassion. She studies the lives of her mother, her grandmother, and the women before them. She sees their resilience, their sacrifice, their silence. She honors their strength but refuses to inherit their suffering. She knows that gratitude does not require imitation, that respect does not mean replication. In many cultures, a woman's value was once measured by her proximity to a man, how well she married, how many children she bore, how quietly she endured. This is not judgment. This is history. But the woman who lives alone learns to measure herself differently. She starts asking new questions. What do I want my life to mean? What do I desire when no one is watching? Who am I when I am not trying to be who they expect? In the stillness of her solitude, answers begin to rise. Not in shouts, but in whispers. The whispers of intuition, the echoes of buried dreams, the call of a future she was never shown but always sensed. She realizes that womanhood is not a role, it is a rhythm, not a script, it is a soul, and she begins to dance to her own. This transformation doesn't happen all at once. It begins in small, almost invisible ways. She stops apologizing for taking up space. She starts saying no without guilt. She buys herself flowers. She travels alone. She cries without shame. She laughs without permission. These moments accumulate, like drops of water that eventually carve stone. And slowly something shifts, not just in her, but in the energy around her. She becomes the interruption to generational cycles. If her mother stayed silent, she speaks. If her grandmother endured abuse, she sets boundaries. If her lineage taught her to survive, she chooses to thrive. This is not betrayal. This is healing. Healing that moves backwards and forwards in time. Because when one woman rises, she lifts others with her, even those who never got the chance to rise themselves. Consider the story of Elisa, a woman who grew up watching her mother cook, clean, and serve tirelessly for a man who never appreciated her. The message was clear: a good woman sacrifices, a good woman suffers, a good woman stays. For years Elisa internalized this. She married young, endured quietly, and smiled through the pain. Until one day, after a decade of diminishing joy, she walked away, not from responsibility but from resignation. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment, enrolled in night school, and began to write poetry for the first time in her life. At 52, she published her first book. Her daughter, now a young adult, watched this unfold, and because Elisa broke the pattern, her daughter never entered it. That is legacy redefined. This is how generational healing works. Not with grand gestures, but with steady shifts. It is the woman who decides to attend therapy, even though no one in her family ever did. It is the woman who chooses not to yell, not to settle, not to perform. It is the woman who holds herself with such integrity that even the silence around her starts to transform. And in breaking these patterns, she reclaims parts of herself that were long buried. Her voice, her softness, her ambition, her pleasure. She stops asking for permission to be whole. She begins to see that being a woman is not a burden. It is a blessing, not a limitation, but a limitless unfolding. In Buddhist teachings, there is the concept of interbeing, the understanding that we are connected to all things. When a woman heals, she is not just healing herself, she is healing her lineage. She is healing the unseen threads that connect her to ancestors and descendants alike. Her choice to live alone, to live consciously, becomes a sacred act of reclamation. There is also resistance, of course, from family, from society, from the voices that say, this is not how we do things. But she is no longer living to do things the way they've always been done. She is living to do things in a way that brings peace, that brings authenticity, that brings life, real life, not survival dressed as tradition. And this redefinition of womanhood ripples into every area of her being, in how she loves, not from emptiness, but from fullness, in how she works, not from obligation, but from inspiration, in how she walks through the world, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who has already chosen herself. She becomes a mirror that reflects what is possible. To the young girl watching from across the street, to the niece who notices that auntie doesn't need a husband to be happy, to the friend who finally admits, I want that too. Without trying to lead, she leads. Without trying to teach, she teaches. Take Mariam, an engineer in her late 30s. She grew up in a conservative family where women were expected to marry by their mid-20s. When she didn't, the questions began. Then the gossip. Then the pressure. But Mariam stayed the course. She built her career, traveled the world, bought a home, adopted a dog. She didn't do it to prove a point. She did it because it was her path. And now, years later, her younger cousin, a quiet, shy girl with dreams of becoming a scientist, told her, "You showed me I could be something else." That is the unseen fruit of breaking patterns. These women are not asking to be celebrated. They are asking to be seen, not through the lens of pity or curiosity, but through the lens of truth. They are not broken. They are breaking ground, planting seeds, living stories that were never written for them, but are now being authored by them. And in redefining womanhood, they make space for nuance, for a version of being female that includes strength and softness, solitude and connection, ambition and rest. They no longer accept narrow definitions. They create wide, open ones, roomy enough to hold all of who they are. They say yes to careers that light their fire, even if it means saying no to traditional timelines. They say yes to healing, even if it means confronting uncomfortable truths. They say yes to pleasure, even if it means unlearning shame. They become fluent in the language of self-trust. There's a quiet power in not needing to explain, in simply living your truth so fully that it becomes its own explanation. These women do not argue with outdated expectations. They outgrow them. They outlive them. And in doing so, they redefine what legacy means. Not everyone will understand, and that's okay. The point is not to be understood by everyone, but to be in harmony with yourself. And that harmony, the kind that hums in the heart of a woman living in alignment, is unshakable. They no longer seek definition from others because they've done the sacred work of defining themselves. Not once, but over and over. With each decision, with each boundary, with each act of courage, the journey is not always easy. There are moments of doubt, of loneliness, of fear. But those moments become the very training ground for transformation. Because to break a pattern, you must first recognize it. To walk a new path, you must first leave the old one. So they walk, step by step, sometimes trembling, always evolving, and in their wake they leave a path, not a prescription, but a possibility. A whisper to every woman still waiting: you can live your life your way. You can honor your heritage without inheriting its wounds. You can be the first, and being the first doesn't make you wrong. It makes you brave. They embody self-sufficiency not as isolation, but as inner mastery and conscious choice. In a world that often equates solitude with loneliness and independence with deficiency, there is a quiet revolution unfolding. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not demand applause. It grows like a seed beneath the surface, strong, intentional, and rooted in the discipline of self-awareness. It is the revolution of the woman who lives alone, not by circumstance, but by choice, not as an escape, but as an expression. And in this space, she cultivates something rare: a self-sufficiency not born from pride or pain, but from presence and purpose. She walks into her home and is not met with silence, but serenity. Her space is not empty, it is full of intention. Every book, every photograph, every candle holds meaning. There is no clutter because there is no need to fill what is already whole. She has learned to sit with herself, not just in moments of comfort, but in moments of discomfort too. She does not rush to fill the void because she has discovered that the void is not a threat, but a teacher. Inner mastery does not arrive suddenly. It is cultivated. Like martial arts, it requires repetition, discipline, and breath. And like the Shaolin monks who train in stillness as much as in movement, this woman has trained herself to be centered in the storm. She knows the world may change, people may leave, circumstances may shift, but she remains, not static, but steady. There's a proverb that says, "When there is no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm." This woman has faced the enemies within, doubt, fear, longing, and made peace with them. She did not conquer them with force but understood them with compassion. And in understanding herself, she became unshakable. People often misunderstand her independence. They assume she does not want love, that she does not need help. But they are mistaken. It is not that she is beyond love, it is that she has refined her understanding of it. She does not seek someone to complete her. She seeks someone to walk beside her, not to rescue her, but to resonate with her. Because when you are whole, you do not enter relationships out of desperation. You enter them from a place of desire, clarity, and freedom. Consider Naomi, a landscape architect in her mid-40s. After a difficult divorce, she chose not to rush into another relationship. Instead, she invested in herself, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. She took classes in herbal medicine, started her own business, and learned how to install her own shelves. Not because she had something to prove, but because she wanted to know herself deeper. Today, she lives in a modest home surrounded by a garden she nurtures daily. There is no loneliness, she says, only quiet moments where I hear my soul breathing. Her life is not a resistance to partnership, it is a celebration of self-discovery. In many traditions, self-sufficiency is not just practical, it is sacred. It is the path of the monk, the sage, the master. It is the ability to sit in solitude without the compulsion to distract oneself. To rise in the morning and attend to one's life with devotion, not because anyone is watching, but because one's life is worth the care. This woman has learned to be the caretaker of her own soul. She wakes early not out of duty, but because she enjoys the stillness of dawn. She cooks not because someone else expects it, but because she honors her body. She meditates, journals, prays not as rituals of escape, but as acts of alignment. Her self-sufficiency is not loud, it is not boastful. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that she can trust herself, that she can meet her own needs, that she can discern between what nourishes and what distracts. She does not chase validation, because her sense of worth does not fluctuate with attention. She is not immune to longing, but she is no longer ruled by it. There's a story about a potter who spends months crafting a single bowl. When asked why he doesn't mass-produce his work, he replies, because each piece reflects my stillness. The self-sufficient woman is like this bowl, handcrafted by time, shaped by stillness, and filled with the substance of her own experience. She is not hurried. She is not hurried into marriage, into motherhood, into definitions that do not fit. She moves with rhythm, not with rush. And in that rhythm, she creates a life that feels like home, not just externally, but internally. She becomes a sanctuary, a place of refuge, a well that does not run dry because she knows how to return to herself and refill. This is not selfishness, it is sustainability, because a woman who knows how to care for herself does not become a burden to others. She becomes a blessing. She understands that reliance is not weakness, but dependency without discernment is. So she chooses wisely. She builds relationships that uplift rather than deplete. She creates boundaries not as walls, but as doors with intentional thresholds. She offers her presence freely but not her energy recklessly. This is self-respect, not arrogance. In the stillness of her solitude, she encounters something even more powerful than independence, interdependence. The ability to be in community without losing individuality, to contribute without compromising. She joins circles of other women, not to vent, but to elevate. She mentors younger girls, not to be admired, but to serve. She volunteers, she supports, she stands in solidarity. Because self-sufficiency does not mean standing alone. It means standing strong. And when love comes, if it comes, it is not met with desperation, but with discernment. She does not confuse chemistry for compatibility. She asks deeper questions. Does this connection honor who I am? Does it inspire who I am becoming? She is no longer seduced by potential because she has cultivated presence, and presence can see clearly. Take Eiko, a Japanese artist who has lived in solitude most of her adult life. In her early years, she was told that a woman without a husband is a woman without value. But after a betrayal that shattered her, she chose to rebuild, not from bitterness, but from beauty. She moved to a quiet village, opened a small art studio, and began painting every morning at sunrise. Her art became her meditation, her solitude, her sanctuary. At 61, she met a fellow artist, kind, calm, curious. There was no rush, no fear, just resonance. They now live together, not out of need, but out of shared joy. We are two whole trees, she says, with roots that touch but do not tangle. Self-sufficiency in this light is a spiritual practice. It is learning to sit with hunger without scrambling, to feel longing without losing clarity, to enjoy company without losing self. It is the mastery of self, not domination but integration, not control but communion. She does not live waiting. She lives creating. She does not live defending. She lives embodying. And in embodying this quiet strength, she becomes a mirror that reflects not society's expectations, but the possibility of a woman who is rooted, radiant, and free. The path is not always celebrated. It is often questioned. Why are you still single? Don't you want children? Isn't it lonely? But she has learned that not all questions require answers. Some simply reflect the questioner's own discomfort. She does not exist to explain herself. Her life is the answer. Her peace is the answer. Her presence is the answer. Like a monk who sweeps the temple courtyard in silence, she tends to her life with devotion. She knows that discipline is not punishment. It is power. The power to choose. The power to return to what matters. The power to live intentionally. There is a Zen teaching that says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. This woman embodies this truth. Her life is not built on escape from the ordinary, but on infusing the ordinary with extraordinary awareness. She waters her plants as a meditation. She folds laundry as a prayer. She treats her solitude as a sacred temple, not a prison. And in this temple, she meets herself fully, without masks, without pretense. She faces her fears. She confronts her patterns. She forgives herself, again and again, because she knows that freedom is not the absence of flaws, but the presence of self-compassion. She is not perfect, but she is whole, and in her wholeness, she gives others permission to explore their own. She becomes a lighthouse, not demanding anyone follow her, but simply shining. Her self-sufficiency is not armor, it is art. Not a wall, it is a way. So, when people say, she's alone, they miss the point. She is not alone. She is all one. At one with herself. At one with life. And in this state, she is not lacking. She is luminous. Her life is not waiting for a man to begin. It is already in motion. Already meaningful. Already miraculous. Because when a woman embodies self-sufficiency as inner mastery, she ceases to be defined by who is or isn't beside her. She becomes defined by what is alive within her. And that inner fire, steady, clear, and compassionate, becomes the guiding force of her life. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman who lives alone is not invisible. She is invincible. She is not waiting to be rescued. She has already rescued herself. She walks through this world with grace, not looking for permission to shine. She is no longer afraid of the silence, because in that silence, she found her roar. So the next time you see a woman who lives alone, don't ask her who she's waiting for. Don't ask her if she's sad. Don't ask her when she'll finally settle down. Just look at her life and witness the masterpiece she's creating. Because some women weren't made to be kept. They were born to be free. If this message stirred something in your spirit, don't just listen. Live it. And remember, there is power in your solitude.